Hi, my name is Glenn Murphy. I am one of two presenters of this video series on how to market and harvest your woodlot for profit. My co-presenter is Dr. Reen Visser from the University of Canterbury. In video 10, Reen will look at how you can help to control costs and at things that you can do to improve the profitability from harvesting your woodlot.
There can be many reasons why you may own and manage a woodlot. For example, you may have used it to protect part of your farm land area from an erosion problem. You may also simply like the look of the trees on your property. But the majority of people who own a woodlot, manage a woodlot, will do so for an economic return at the end of the growing cycle. So maximizing your profit is an important consideration to ensure that you get a fair return on that investment that you've made. Those considerations ideally will start at the time of planting. So the profitability of your woodlot very much depends on a number of critical factors, including the distance to market. So transportation is a major cost. Getting those logs from your property out to a market will be a major cost that you need to keep in mind. The terrain, so where you plant the woodlot, forest, on your terrain is also a critical consideration. So if you can plant the forest on an area of your farm that is closer to the access point, closer to the road, is on more moderate terrain, you will help by reducing your harvest costs at time of harvest. So certainly broken, steep terrain, while that's an ideal place to plant a forest for protecting soil erosion, stabilizing slopes, that is also the area where you are going to incur the highest harvesting costs at the time of harvest. So woodlot size may be tempting to put smaller forests in, but again, with the modern, more commercial harvesting systems, they simply are more efficient at harvesting larger woodlots. So once we drop below that sort of 10 hectare woodlot size, simply the cost of the harvesting crew getting to your property and leaving from your property at the end becomes a bigger component of that overall cost. So it's the fixed costs are spread over a much smaller volume. Here's just a slide to show you what typical transport costs will do. You can see when we're only 40-50 kilometers to market, total transportation costs might be in that order of $15 per tonne. But when we start to get over 100 kilometres, up towards 150 kilometres in terms of a one-way distance to market, almost a quarter of the value of your forest is going to be consumed or taken up in covering those transportation costs. Accessing the back of a farm when you start to get into steeper adverse grades, that can also exacerbate the cost. The other thing to keep in mind with regard to transportation is that when we introduce a larger harvesting system into a woodlot, you can have anywhere from 5 to 12 truckloads of logs departing from that on a daily basis. So certainly if the access point to your woodlot is past your private residence, that is certainly something to keep in mind just in terms of the volume or the number of truck passages that will occur on your property at the time of harvest. You can, of course, suggest that there should be a restriction. You may wish to limit the number of trucks or limit the time that the trucks have access to your property. So you can certainly do that, but also be aware that can have a major cost implication to not only the trucking contractor, but very much the logging contractor who needs to keep the product moved off the landing that they're working on so that they continue to work in an efficient and safe manner. Aspects to consider when preparing for your harvest. Really, your harvest plan should be prepared at least 1 year in advance, and that allows people to start aspects such as road construction and putting your landings in place. So when you build your roads, when you build your landings, it is often important to leave them exposed to the sun and to the effects, the drying effects of wind for more than 6 months. That will really help consolidate the ground, and it will minimize the risk of things turning into a big mud bath, say when it rains at time of harvest. The other really nice aspect of preparing ahead of time is that if you can get your forest what they call harvest ready, so the access road is there, the landings are there, you can be a little bit more opportunistic around capturing the market opportunity. So if the log prices are high and your forest is ready to harvest, that's ideal. You'll be able to capture that opportunity. It will literally take many months of preparation. So if the market's high and you wish to start harvesting, it's going to take you months to get your roads and landings in place, ready for that, at which point in time the market may have gone down again. Landings, again, as a smaller landowner, you might be quite tempted to minimize the size of the landings or restrict the logger in terms of the space that they can work on. But you should know that, again, that has a major productivity, a cost, as well as a safety implication for the logging contractor. So landings typically need to be large enough to process those stems, be able to store the log sorts, and get your logging trucks out onto that site so that they can be loaded out and moved away efficiently. So some of those aspects to consider for harvesting is, you can see in that chart below, the more roads you build in terms of length, of course, the higher the cost associated with that road construction. You can see road costs vary quite considerably. So road costs on moderate slopes with a good soil base might only be $40,000 per kilometre. So this is for a truck road, but certainly if you're working in your clay type soil on steeper terrain, the cost of building a road is up to $160,000 per kilometre. And of course that cost, if you're doing it commercially, needs to be met from the revenues that you are generating from that harvesting operation. Other aspects to consider, so really just combining these two factors, is that you have the opportunity to carry out everything within the forest, perhaps on the back of your property. So that is building that landing and getting that access road there and making that available to on-highway trucks. However, you can often help save money by extracting the timber from the back of your property to the front of the property using off-highway trucks, and that really can help save on roading costs. So you're building a lower standard road that may be perfectly acceptable for the subsequent farming operations that you intend to do. It simply wouldn't be able to carry a log truck. So you're using forwarders or off-road trucks to get the timber from your woodlot to a place where there is ready access for a on-road truck. Other aspects to consider actually during harvesting is that our harvests typically generate a large amount of residues. So for a 600 tonne a hectare type forest, we might end up with about 75 tonnes per hectare of harvest residues. So these are the offcuts or the non-commercial parts of the stem, but it also includes all of the branches and the tops of trees. If they have to be removed off the site, like if you mandate the removal of that material to the logger, that will typically incur a very high cost. It's simply a lot of material for them to move. So the question for you is, where's a good place to put those residues? Where they have to make sure that they can't enter a waterway, and obviously you don't want them interfering with farming operations. The other good thing is often this material is large enough to make a good quality firewood. So if you're in need of firewood, perhaps you can work with the logger and make sure that it's stored and stacked and sorted in a way that it's actually advantageous for you to access that once the harvest operation is complete and get the firewood from that material. But just be very realistic about how they need to manage that material. You've got your farm to consider, they've got their logging operation to consider. As long as it's decided on and communicated ahead of time, you will be in a good position. In terms of cost control, I mentioned that harvesting systems are very expensive to operate, and most contractors will have a fairly detailed knowledge about what their day cost is for the total harvesting system. The way that they then come up with a logging rate is they look at what they can produce on a per day basis from the site that you're asking them to harvest. So as shown by this example here, if they have a day cost of $7,000 per day, which would not be untypical for a small to medium-sized harvesting operation, if they can produce 200 tons a day while harvesting your woodlot, that would equate to a logging rate that they would quote you of $35 per ton. However, if the logger felt that there were a number of restrictions associated with that woodlot that would reduce their daily production to only 140 tons, then they would have to charge you a logging rate of $50 per ton to make that economically viable for their harvesting service. So some of those things that you can do to help keep control of costs while harvesting a woodlot. Costs can be high, but certainly the frequent moves of the logging systems is a real cost for the contractor. So what we need to do is make sure that the equipment is utilized as fully as possible. What you can do is actually align multiple woodlots to be harvested at the same time. So if you've got other woodlots on your property, or if you've got a neighbor that has a woodlot, please consider a contractor harvesting multiple woodlots to reduce that move cost. Operating from smaller landings, already mentioned, that constrains production, simply adds cost. And also making sure that your roads and landings are simply up to a standard where a contractor can maximize their efficiency. Restricting people from loading out early morning or in the evening can also simply load up the landing to the point where the contractor slows down their operation. Poor planting boundaries, so having good planting boundaries that minimizes the effect of edge trees, very beneficial. And also some harvest areas are simply too small for mechanized operations, in which case you're looking to get a very manual type operation that simply has a higher production cost associated with it. Finally, I mean, most people would like their woodlots harvested in the summer or in a dry time. So I think most people understand that. It minimizes the amount of soil disturbance, it minimizes the amount of mud that you might see in and around. But obviously, such restrictions can also impact the logging operation. A harvesting contractor is looking for security of work over a longer period of time so they can spread out their fixed costs. So really the call is for you to help the contractor be more productive. And so you need to be realistic, in which case you get the best outcome in terms of not only what the site will look like at the end of the harvest, but also making sure that you can actually maximize the profit from your harvest.
This concludes video 10. In video 11, we will continue to look at ways to improve profitability from the harvesting of your woodlot. We will focus on maximising value recovery and then summarise those factors that will affect your financial outcome. If you have any questions, please direct these to the email link shown below.